media and YouTube is just incredible. Well, I've been getting emails. Well, I'll just say the censorship is absolutely incredible. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that will elevate us as well, our visibility, and also will give you the freshest, newest content. And so please do that, as well as bookmark HagmannReport.com. We have a wonderful, just an extremely, we're extremely blessed to bring you Gary Hunt, who's going to be joining us just momentarily on video. A patriot. He's going to be talking about a lot of very interesting things. Before we get to miss again, code Hagmann. And by the way, we do have a winner of the contest announced earlier, so we're closing that out. You will be notified by email after the show. Thank you so much for participating, Joe.
Yeah, this hour we have, and for the rest of the show, from outpostoffreedom.com, Mr. Gary Hunt. We got a number of great and fascinating topics we're going to get into. Go to his website, outpostoffreedom.com. It is content rich. There's so much there. Up-to-date articles on a number of different issues. Gary, welcome to the program.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. You are a very smart and busy man. You do a lot of work, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. Before the break, we were talking on some of the things you want to get into. Where do you want to start? One of the most interesting things for me, something that we followed on the show for a few years now, is the Bundy Ranch standoff and all the things that have happened since from Oregon.
And you know, Gary, Mr. Hunt has been following the government overreach so well, and he's very articulate. And again, outpostoffreedom.com and outpostoffreedom.com/blog. But you've been following this government overreach, and you've been on top of this forever. I mean, for even before the internet, basically. So let's start there, if you want.
I suppose it started in 1981, really, with the run-in with the Internal Revenue Service. About the same time that they bailed out New York and Chrysler Motor Company, I had some problems with payments not being made in my business, but they clamped me down and actually handcuffed my office. They put sleeves over the door handles so we couldn't get in the office until I got them a substantial payment. But so I've had a run-in with the IRS, and that kind of led me into the patriot community. But back then, it was primarily the people that were concerned about the lawfulness of the income tax. But in 1992, in February, I started publishing. I'd learned quite a bit in that ensuing 9 years, and started publishing a newspaper called Outpost of Freedom. It was print. It was a semi-monthly publication, and I had 2 copies out, and I got 2 editions out, and I got a call from a friend in Texas, asked me what was going on in Waco. And I ended up going to Waco on March 5th and didn't leave until April 22nd. So I was there through the whole ordeal, met some of the Davidians that were not inside, met some of those that came out. And after watching the government murder those people, it changed my life. And so I ended up, I had my own business, a surveying business at the time, and I gave up the business and traveled for a year and a half around the country using fax networking back pre-internet, using fax network to communicate the various stories that I was covering at the time. And then I ran out of money in 95. I had to go back to work, so I settled in Phoenix, Arizona, and then went online about that time. And worked until 2012 when I retired, and we covered a number of stories, including Oklahoma City bombing, the murder of militia chaplain Michael Hill in Ohio, Nord Davis, overflights at Nord Davis's compound in North Carolina, just a number of stories, and that's where, it's been continuous but relatively slow. But then obviously more recently, things such as I hate the word standoff, but we'll use that. The standoff at the Bundy Ranch back in April of 2014, I had met Ryan Payne on the internet, a couple of months before that, and he called me when he was on his way to the Bundy Ranch, an organization that existed at the time, Operation Mutual Aid, OMA, uh, put out most of the call out for that. A lot of people responded through that online organization. And so during the standoff, I was communicating with both Ryan Payne and Ryan Bundy. But I didn't go down there for that. And so what I was doing was kind of putting out fires when rumors got going rampant. I could call one or the other of them and find out if something was true. For example, at one point, there was a claim going around the internet that 15 people had been arrested at a demonstration out there. So I called Ryan Bundy and confirmed that that had not happened. But it was reporting from a distance. But as with all my stories, I need access to somebody involved in it to do the story. I don't rely on what I see on the internet. And so my venture into this realm at Bunkerville was the start of this current onslaught of government intrusion into people's property rights, basically. Shortly before that,
well, Gary, if I can just stop you right there. So you were just a normal guy, normal everyday guy, and you saw what was going on, and essentially you wanted to see for yourself, so you kind of dropped what you were doing. But this after you had your own experience with the IRS and government overreach with your own business. So you figured, okay, I'm going to go, for example, from Oklahoma City and before and after events, and so you did your own investigative journalism or your own citizen investigation of these events. That's kind of laying the groundwork, and then you, of course, but you were an outspoken patriot before that, and so okay, so I mean that's kind of the bottom line, right?
yeah, just after watching my government, I'm a Vietnam veteran. After watching my government murder over 80 people in Waco, Texas, I was outraged. It changed my life drastically and almost instantly.
Wow.
But just when we get to Bundy Ranch, we've heard about civil disobedience, that goes back to the 1700s, early 1800s. But one event that kind of gave us a new perspective was when the budget problems closed everything down and the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. was basically shut down. They had barricades around it. I saw mostly Vietnam veterans carry those barricades and throw them at the fence at the White House. And it occurred to me that that's civil defiance. It's not carrying a sign and yelling slogans and taking a risk of being arrested and then released. It was an act of civil defiance. They actually took property, removed it, and threw it against the White House fence. So I used the term civil defiance then. Now, what happened at Bunkerville is an act of civil defiance. And, it's a new step. It's a new stage in this resentment of the government's intrusion into our life. And so it was kind of exciting to see that there was enough momentum in the will of the people to take a stand against the government at the Bundy Ranch. Now, the trial's coming up, and some interesting things are coming out of this trial right now. One is that Dan Love, who was in charge and wrote the entire Gold Butte impound plan, which is a book that describes the teams they've got, what they're going to do, where they were set up. Even the limited free speech zones were identified in the plan that he wrote. But now it's being exposed that the BLM Office of Inspector General, there was a report issued, and two people, one was named Salazar, who was his superior, but they didn't name the agent himself, and we're finding out now, it's been verified, that Daniel Love was taking advantage at the Burning Man event in Nevada, and so this is the guy. He was probably. I'm working on a story on that now, but it appears that he was probably in special operations in the military, had the military SWAT training, so to speak, and is maybe a psychopath and just, he wants to assert his authority any way, every way he can. And that's the picture I'm beginning to develop, but that article's in progress. But the judge ruled that if the government puts him on the stand, and presumably if the defense calls him, that OIG report will be a part of the evidence that has to be submitted to the jury. So interestingly, the character of the guy that was in charge of the BLM side of the operation down there is going to be exposed. And another interesting exposure from that is a group, I don't know if you can call it a company or not. They went by the name Longbow Productions, and it was peopled by FBI agents. And this is appalling to people like us, because we're press and we expect, and when we get to talking about Burns, we'll go further into it, but we expect that we'll be respected as press, and people will come to us with stories, with information that helps us during our research to expose something that's happening. But Longbow Productions, even a year later, was still interviewing participants of the Bundy standoff in April 2014 on camera, paying them, getting them drunk, setting women on them, all kinds of tactics, even staging the interviews where if they didn't like the outcome of the interview, they would say, well, why don't you say it this way? And this is another article I'm working on now. I've got to contact some more people that were interviewees in that. But the FBI is actually acting as press, and the effect it will, the nullifying effect it will have on the press, like you and me, is that people won't trust the press anymore because it might be government agents trying to get information. When we're trying to get information to expose the government, they're trying to get information to convict people.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is Longbow Productions was not infiltrated by the FBI. They are the FBI posing as press, is what you're saying, right?
At this point, it appears that Longbow Productions was established. Whether there's any corporate entity or not, I don't know yet. But they were established, and the cameramen were FBI, the interviewers were FBI. Perhaps the women they sicked on some of the interviewees to try and entice them into interviews were FBI.
Interesting. Okay.
My guess is the entire crew was FBI.
So this is one way to marginalize the new media, the independent media, like us, like you, like us, like the people who are trying to get to the truth of the matter. They sabotage our efforts.
It goes even beyond that. When you've got a film production crew, look at television nowadays. When I was a kid, there were 3 channels. That's all we got.
Me too.
But
yeah.
now you've got all these reality programs and everything, and they're done by unknown names until they establish themselves. So Longbow Productions would appear to be quasi-mainstream, at least, doing reality programs, which was the guise that they went in under. Not quite a reality, but an investigative journalism with some pretty established presumed credentials in what they do. That people like to see themselves on television, and so they're very susceptible to that. And it even goes beyond alternate media, which I am, and I guess you are too. I don't know where you would class yourself, but you're approaching MSM.
Well, no. We're independent media. We're definitely in that framework of alternative media. But by the way, I just want to so we're clear on things, so our attorneys and so to just keep everyone out of trouble here. No one's accusing anybody of anything here with respect to Longbow Productions. It's just the evidence does seem that there's some infiltration there. Mr. Hunt is not making any accusations. We're not making any accusations. We're just talking about the appearance of what his investigative research has found. I just want to put that out there, Mr. Hunt, because we've got a lot of people who just think that the legal system is a weapon for censorship. So, just keep us both out of hot water.
Okay, well, yes, it is an investigation in progress, and I've got quite a few interviews to do before I publish it, but the appearance is, as I stated, and if I can prove it, then it will be in the article, but I won't do the article unless I can prove it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
But when you're working on something like this, even now, me coming on your program, maybe somebody who was interviewed by them will contact me, and I'll be able to make another contact as well. So I've got to kind of put out what I'm working on
Yeah,
sometimes.
and that's what we do as well. And I love that approach because anyone who has information, Gary Hunt is our guest. His website, outpostoffreedom.com. If you have information about this, if you were there, and a lot of people that that listen to our program have been involved in those various incidents. So contact Mr. Hunt with the information you have. He'll vet it and then publish the article. Go ahead, sir.
Well, let's see. In last year, I was in early January. I was notified by some people at the. We'll go to the Hagmanns now. I had been looking into the Hagmann issue for OMD, which is the newer version of the OMA, but it was established with a 5-member board. We didn't realize at the time that one of those 5 members was an informant for the FBI, and we'll get to that, as I say, later on. But we were looking at where we might call the active patriots out to another incident, and one of them was that came up was the Hagmanns, Dwight and Stephen, when they had been reconvicted of a crime that they had been convicted of and sentenced and served their time. I'm working on an article on that now, but in the process, I was contacted after the people got into the our National Wildlife Refuge. They'd come across some records, and the folder was identified as Hagmann trailing, and it had to do with their right to travel between the allotments for grazing purposes, between some of their own or privately owned land for grazing purposes. And there were 700 pages in this report, but they weren't organized, so I had to sort the 700 pages chronologically. And I wrote a series called The Harassment of the Hagmanns, and it goes from the 80s and the 90s, even before the first fire that they were ultimately convicted on. And back in 83 or 84, Dwight Hagmann said, "They're trying to take my ranch from me." I mean, he perceived what was the government was pursuing even back then. And this record of these 700 documents in that series I wrote, Harassment of the Hagmanns, demonstrates the divisiveness of the primarily Fish and Wildlife Service, some participation with the BLM, but primarily Fish and Wildlife Service, and doing everything they could to become obstructions to him being able to even use the allotments that he was paying for the right to graze on. And so then we have, I think it's 2001, the first fire, which was to clear the weeds out of one of the allotment areas. It went beyond the allotment area, burned some land that the government quite often goes in and burns land to get rid of weeds and get new regrowth. I see it down here where I live. A pasture burn, it comes back better, richer the next year.
Right, and just to be clear for the people listening out there, when ranchers when you have a lot of property, a lot of forested area, wooded area, these are controlled burns, and they're done in order, a controlled burn to avoid the losing your entire area, your grazing area as well as the forested area. This is done routinely, and it's done with permission and not oversight, but certainly with implied consent of the Bureau of Land Management, and is done by BLM at times, correct?
Correct. And BLM does it quite frequently in some areas. Now, Dwight Hagmann had called them and said, "Is it a burn day?" And they said yes. He didn't like the idea of having to get permission to do the burn, so he confirmed it was a burn day and did the burn. Now that story I'm investigating now. I've pulled the court records, and I want to go through the transcripts and everything. But then a few years later, there was a fire that was either set by BLM or started by lightning. But at any rate, it was threatening their ranch and their personal property. So they set a backfire, which is another common occurrence. A backfire, you start a fire, it doesn't build up in intensity, and it takes away the fuel, creating a buffer around your property to protect you from the more significant fire that's approaching you. So those are the two fires that they were years later convicted of and sentenced and sent to prison, served their time, came back out, and then a few years later, the BLM files an appeal with the appellate court asking that they go by the sentencing guidelines. And so the outcome at the appellate court is they get the minimum 5 years. So on January 4th, I think it was, they were supposed to report and return to prison, and they're down at Terminal Island, California, in a federal prison now. And so in objection to what the government does, and I am working on a double jeopardy story on that now, research in progress. But on, I think it was January 2nd, there was a demonstration in Burns, Oregon, in support of the Hagmanns. And Ryan Payne, Ammon Bundy, and a few others had developed a plan to occupy the refuge. It was well-kept plan. It was well executed because nobody really knew about it until perhaps an hour before it happened. And that was probably somebody overheard and reported to the government, but they managed to go down to Millhauer National Wildlife Refuge, which was vacant at the time. Most of the doors were unlocked. There was a set of keys left on a desk. And so they occupied the entire place, the firehouse, virtually every, they had access to virtually every building or a room on the refuge. And the only one.
Gary, if I can just interject this, a lot of people listening to this might ask, why, in response to what had happened to the Bundys, why did they put their sights on the refuge building there and occupy that? What was their motivation behind that?
Well, let me finish this first. The only building that remained locked the entire time, and only 2 people had keys to it, was the visitor center, because there were souvenirs and things like that. So that was kept locked the entire time. The motivation, I don't know, I guess the best way to explain it is how many children disappear every day in this country? But how many do we hear about? Now, how does the one that gets heard about get the attention, the focus on them? Well, the move was to get focus on their resentment of what the treatment of the Hagmanns.
Ah, okay. Okay, I get it. Okay.
And the other part of that is they felt that the government had no right. If we go back to the Northwest Ordinance, even before the Constitution, the government held land, the Northwest Territories and everything, with the intention of disposing of that land for reward for military service and for revenue. In fact, the Revenue Act in Oregon, 5% of the proceeds of sale of disposed land was supposed to go to Oregon. But the government instead, in Millhauer and other areas, is not diminishing that public land. They're actually increasing it. They're doing it by running farmers like the Hagmanns off the ranch. They did it in Clark County, Nevada, where Clive and Bundy, out of, I guess, 40, 50 different ranches, only Clive and Bundy was the last rancher standing, because they, by one divisive means, they managed to make it difficult to impossible to continue your operation unless you become defiant against the government, stand against them. So that was the secondary issue, and this is really big out west. I mean, it's happening throughout the Northwest.
Yeah, it is. We are up against the break right now, folks. You're listening to this edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Gary Hunt is our guest. His website, outpostoffreedom.com. There is just a tremendous amount of information there dealing with all the things that we've talked about, plus so much more. The government's interference, federal land grabs, land rights, the oppressive government taking away the ability of farmers and landowners to continue to raise their stock and continue to be profitable. When we come back, we got a lot to get into with Gary on from the Bundy ranches, which is what we already started, to the federal government privatizing all these public lands and privately owned lands for themselves, for quote-unquote wildlife refugees. In the meantime, people are suffering, farms are being taken away. We'll be right back after these short messages. Stay with us.
And welcome back, folks, to this edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Our guest is Gary Hunt. His website, outpostoffreedom.com. Very rich, very informative, very insightful, very interesting history. And these are the kind of people, folks, that just normal people like us attempting to make a difference. And isn't that what we're supposed to do? Isn't that our charge?
Gary Hunt is our guest. Outpost of freedom.com is his website, folks. Go to his website and check out some of the just fantastically detailed articles that he has in there. The latest one from a few days ago, Freedom of the Press, Tilting at Windmills, Redux. And
interesting information.
And it ties into to Portland, to the Oregon, to the standoff, to what's going on with the courts.
You're not getting the real story, folks. You're not getting the real story.
Absolutely not. And once the wildlife standoff after the Bundy Ranch happened, and you saw a lot of people come in and protect the Bundys at their own ranch, the Bureau of Land Management tried to impose grazing fees on the cows. The whole thing got out of hand. Bottom line, the Bureau of Land Management left. The Bundys seemingly won. Then you had the Mauer Life Refuge, where you had some armed militiamen go and stay there and kind of hold it
occupied. That's right. And we
had a shooting, really an unprovoked shooting. They were on their way from the refuge to a town hall meeting, and all the people were rounded up, put in jail. A judge found them not guilty in Oregon, but now they've been facing charges in Nevada. I'm going to let you take that where you will, Gary.
Okay, April 12th, 2014, you just referenced when the cattle were left. I thought I fixed that.
I love it.
It's my dad's cell phone. No,
this is so much fun, and folks, this humanizes everything. We do the same thing. Sometimes when I was on Infowars with Alex Jones, I had my cell phone on which I don't use. I don't use a cell phone except my wife makes me take it, like if I'm traveling for emergencies. I don't even know how to use the thing, and so my daughter set the cell phone as a ring. The ringtone was a bark. Okay, and so I'm on with Infowars, and all of a sudden you hear this. Ruff, ruff, ruff. So I said, "Man, I'm sorry. I didn't even know. I mean, that was the first time that happened in like I don't know, a year. But anyway, yeah, go ahead, Gary."
Anyway, I've always referred to that day as the Great Unrustling. The government had rustled the cattle. Actually, they broke a number of laws. The court order gave them the right to impound the cattle. That's like impounding your car. They had made arrangements with I think it was in Idaho or Utah, an auction house to sell the cattle, which was not part of the court order. They had been trying to make arrangements to bypass both the legally required, especially crossing state lines, the branding inspector and the cattle health inspector. So they were breaking three laws that weren't authorized by the court in their activity on that. So, the government the king can do no wrong is the attitude the government's developed recently, and this goes back to Waco. The king can do no wrong. It's getting appalling. The government thinks they're the king, and their minions have the same authority the king has. Maybe things will change after this past November or January. I sure hope so. At least we have not a politician in office for a change, and I think that's refreshing start.
Yeah, indeed, it is. At least it seems that way. All right. All right. Yeah, I mean, there's so much here to cover, but Joe, Yeah,
I don't know if this is a good time to jump in with this, but our last guest, Greg Jackson, and we've seen this in the news with Trump's immigration executive orders, the backlash from certain judges, specifically in the Ninth Circuit Court. Have you seen an increased trend especially in the end phases of the Obama administration into the beginning of Trump's administration, where judges are just outright refusing to follow the laws, regardless of what the Constitution says, just based on ideological differences.
I would say so.
And does that apply to what we see in Oregon and especially in Nevada?
Well, let's wait on Oregon until we get a little further along, because something very interesting, let's title it Lawfare, is going on in Oregon right now. That's rather interesting, but we'll talk about that trial. But as far as, yes, the trial in Nevada, the two things I mentioned are groundbreaking, really. I mean, we've got the government, FBI, playing press, trying to induce using, I don't know if they used any drugs, but they used alcohol, women, and cash to try and control the testimony. And then they wanted to use that as evidence in the trial. And then we've got this rogue called Special Agent Dan Love, who is in charge of the entire operation. And he's just abused his authority under the, based upon the OIG report. And, you know, it has been confirmed that even though unnamed in the report, that it is Dan Love, and the government in their order, I think it was yesterday, acknowledged that he was the one not identified in the OIG report that had done all these illegal things. So, yeah, well, judicial activism, I'm in Northern California, and a few years ago, California's constitution is one of the longest in the world, because if there's a referendum and it passes, it becomes a part of the Constitution. So there was one on marriage between a man and marriage is only between a man and a woman a few years ago. It was passed by a decent majority, so it became a part of the Constitution. And then you get a federal judge ruling that it's unconstitutional. Now, my federal Constitution doesn't mention marriage. The California Constitution, with that referendum part of the Constitution, mentioned marriage. Where does the federal government get the authority to determine that the federal Constitution that doesn't mention something overrides the Constitution that mentions something?
And now we're talking really states' rights versus the Constitution, but we're also talking about not only just that, or not just that, but also the judicial supremacy. Man, there's a lot of things going on here. So, okay, all right, yeah.
Judicial activism, actually, and
yeah, that's true.
They've become a legislative body,
right? Yeah, and you know, I had something up here, Gary. That no, I'm just gonna. This is compliments of Greg Jackson, our previous guest. This speaks to what you're talking about here. He wrote this to consider, or Thomas Jefferson stated, to consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions is a very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. The Constitution has erected no such single tribunal, knowing that to whatever hands codified with the corruption of time and party, its members would become despots. So that's what you're talking about.
Well, yes, but, you know, let's go back, not Thomas Jefferson said that early on, but in the early 1900s, in my reading, it appears that for 2 or 3 decades, people looked at the Supreme Court as the buffer between the people and the legislative and judicial branch, to say, no, that's not a constitutional law. And for the most part, in my research, prior to the Civil War, the Supreme Court quite often said you can't enact that law. So it was looked on one way at its inception, and some people, Patrick Henry was another one, even Alexander Hamilton was concerned that what might happen, but those early decades of the country, it did not take an arbitrary, presumed arbitrary authority. In fact, Marbury versus Madison, that people misunderstand now, simply said that if the executive reads the Constitution one way and the legislative reads it another way, the only body that can stand between them and make the decision is the Supreme Court. They didn't say that they can interpret all the laws, and it was decades later before they started interpreting to the degree that they do now. But then another interesting step in this whole progression, and we're going to 1872 now, when Harvard University, it was Harvard or Yale, I think it was Harvard, developed what they called the case law method. Prior to that, things that went before the court were judged on what would be called substantive law. How does it compare to the Constitution? So this case law method that began in 1872 says, well, we don't have to go back to the Constitution. We look at prior decisions, and then we'll take from those decisions rather than the Constitution. So quite often now the Supreme Court decisions and even the lower court decisions, they step away from the Constitution by referring to something that occurred in another case. And probably the best example, jumping ahead to the Group 2 trial in Portland, Oregon, Constitution recognized that in all criminal proceedings, the right to a jury trial, in all civil proceedings in excess of $20, a right to a jury trial. So we've got Judge Anna Brown that a few years ago in a bench trial approved a restitution of $3,400 and some dollars, and the Ninth Circuit upheld that. Well, that's over $20, but he was denied a jury trial in the civil action. The restitution was outside of that. And now with the current trial, since they couldn't get a conviction on the Group 1, with Group 2, they've added the misdemeanor charges, and the judge has ruled that this is a Class B misdemeanor. Therefore, they don't have a right to a jury trial. And it makes you wonder what Constitution they're reading. However, I'm working on that one too. I've got to find the case. I've found reference to it, but I haven't pulled it yet. Apparently some court decision somewhere along the line said, well, we've got this little gray area where even though it's criminal, they don't, if it's a minor charge, criminal proceeding, minor charge, criminal charge, they don't have to have a jury trial. So these guys are guaranteed conviction if it's a bench trial, the way Judge Anna Brown's going. Now, I'm not sure Anna Brown is going to hold her position very long as far as that, but it will be a bench trial. And what she's going to do is during the course of the Group 2 trial, the evidence for the felonies will be presented by the defendants and the prosecution. She'll send the jury out. She will then continue for any additional evidence or defense witnesses on the misdemeanor trial to complete the partially completed misdemeanor trial while the jury's out to deliberating for a verdict on the felony trial. So there's two trials going on at the same time. One's felony with a jury, the other's misdemeanor without a jury, but it's over the same offenses, and that sounds like double jeopardy to me.
Yeah, how can that even be?
Case law allows it. The case law method allows it.
Okay.
I've written one article in the series now, to jury or not to jury, in the Burns Chronicle series. When I started writing about Burns back in January of last year, all my series have a name. Camp Lone Star was Kevin Massey. The Bundy Affair was Bundy. Burns Chronicles, I've written 57 articles on that subject so far, and they're dealing with the trial. And then I've got another series called Freedom of the Press, which is the spinoff from the Portland trial and recent occurrences that we'll get to. Okay. But anyway, back to Burns. Here we have actually the third case of civil defiance, and probably to a greater degree, rather than getting the cattle unrustled, they want to get attention to what's happening there, both with regard to the Hagmanns and the reacquisition of government lands by the government. Now, where the refuge sat, there were two parcels of land that those buildings were on. Those parcels had gone to private sector. One of them was, this is in the 30s and the 40s, one of them was repurchased by the government. The other one was acquired by trading land with the property owners. So it came back to the government, but jurisdiction never came back with it. And this is an issue that Judge Anna Brown refused to rule on, not ownership, but jurisdiction. She refused to rule on a motion filed by Shauna Cox. She just kind of let it disappear because it was probably a legitimate challenge.
Interesting.
Wanted to towel and throw it over that phone. I thought I had it fixed. So all these funny things go on that just defy. If the founding fathers here were here now, I think it started another revolution over what's happened. In this case, they've been taken into a foreign jurisdiction. If they were trespassing on that land and the jurisdiction is Harney County, the state laws apply. They would have to file for eviction and have to go through this process that they would have, you or I would have to go through if we wanted to evict somebody from our property. But instead, they come in bulldog, swinging swords almost, and bullets to treat these guys with felony. And if that fails, we'll get them on misdemeanor and we'll make sure they don't get a jury trial. It's getting worse. Yes. Now, will it change with the new administration? Well, I guess we got a new attorney general yesterday, I think it was.
Yes.
And maybe it will change.
Yeah, Jeff Sessions was approved as Attorney General yesterday. There's also been some changes to the dislike of the left at the EPA, as well as the Department of Education, and changes. We'll see. Trump says he's a man who wants to bring back power to the people. He wants to give back to the people. He's sick of the intrusive and overbearing government, their regulations, their demands. And I pray if we ever had a chance to roll some of this back to make some changes, this would be the time. Now, will he follow through on those promises? He's been following through on a lot, yet we're still waiting to see, what he will roll out. I guess the question, though, now is, in the interim, in the meantime, aside from the Bundys and the Bundy's Ranch and their situation, these lands that have been designated as federal domains for wildlife, I read during the Obama administration, he confiscated land 3 size the times of Texas throughout the United States. Yeah, 2.5 times. That they say they put aside for wildlife refuge and environmental conservation, and we see the problems with the eminent domain and the wetlands. The government coming in saying, the house you've lived in for 40 years, we've just determined that that's a wetland, and you're going to either have to move or pay us a $20,000 a day fine. I know these cases happen often and a lot. With the way Trump's presidency has been going, would you expect or be surprised by any interference from, not Trump himself, but, some attention by the office of the presidency on these issues?
Well, one of the most interesting orders he did is the one that if you want a new regulation, fine, get rid of 2.
Yeah.
That's cute little trick. And I'm interested in seeing how it works, if they're going to try and consolidate the 2 that they had with a 3rd one and make that the new one. And if so,
that's what I said. Yep.
And deal with it.
Yep. That's how they do it.
My feeling quite simply is it's going to take 5-6 months of him in office to find out where we're really going. But as far as, I'm an optimist anyway, but I'm extremely optimistic that we're going to see progression. We're going to see the pendulum begin to swing back the other way, at least under the Trump administration.
Yeah, indeed.
I would hope so. I mean, if we continue to go on our current course, they're already well on their way to completing their goals. Private property is almost abolished. All these things have been designated for federal use, federal land. They can come into anything you own and say we're confiscating this for our own use. But what's really sad, back to the Bundys, especially since in my opinion, if they did anything that was law breaking, it was going to that wildlife refuge and going to a public property and a government
the perception
property.
of that is
right. But to come
law-breaking.
back, I guess it's vindictive for the government to come back and attack them and charge them for standing their ground on their own property years earlier.
Well, yeah, that okay, but we've got people sending us emails too that wanted you to address Lavoy Finicum, the murder of Lavoy Finicum. Do you have anything to say about that, Gary, with respect to in the context of the situation?
Well, one of the things OMD, I was writing briefs for OMD when some potential hotspot would come up. We would look into it, and then I'd prepare a package for the group. And one of those, almost 2 years ago, was Lavoy Finicum, because he had been dealing with the federal government and was beginning to take a hard position about not letting them take away his rights even before then. But I didn't meet Lavoy until I got up to Burns on January 24th. And, you feel something around Lavoy. He's very strong, very firm in his convictions. I really liked him. I mean, we had a little run-in to begin with because he thought I was somebody else, but once that was resolved, and I don't think I spent 15 minutes with him, but we had some good characters there. Ammon Bundy has got a presence. Lavoy Finicum had a presence. The incident on 395 on January 26th, though, is the one that's of concern. Now, I've done 3 articles on the ambush. The first one was based on the video. The second one was based on reports by the government. And the third one was based on the published, readily available investigation by the Oregon State Police. Now, why did the Oregon State Police cooperate? Well, I coined a term years ago called greenmail back in 1994. The Crime Control Act of 1994 is where we had cops on the street, if you remember that. But when I read the act, it was kind of interesting because the government's going to give them money to cover offset the additional law enforcement officer, 100% first year, 75 second year, 50 third year, 25 fourth year. But don't worry, we'll teach you asset forfeiture. But also in that contract is if they accept that money for that cop on the street, they are forever obedient to the Department of Justice that gave them the funds, greenmail. Now we've got schools, police departments, county governments, city governments, all these agencies that are getting money from the federal government, and we see a manifestation of that. They're going to take away the money in sanctuary cities if they don't enforce the laws that they agreed to enforce with regard to turning illegal aliens over to the government. That's greenmail. Blackmail is where you say, you give me money or I'm going to tell on you. Greenmail is when the government says, you do what we tell you and we will give you money. But if you don't do what we tell you, we'll take that money back.
Interesting. I've never heard it described in those definitive terms. We got about 40 seconds before the break. One quick question. If the federal government says, all right, we're going to withhold the money from the sanctuary cities unless you change your laws, wouldn't the states, local and states government, don't they give the federal government a lot more money in tax revenue and other things? Wouldn't they just be able to say, well, we're not going to give you anything?
Well, I don't know if the state pays any taxes to the federal government. We do, and it goes directly to the federal government. It would be nice if that money didn't go to Washington. They take out their 22%, because I understand 78 cents on the dollar goes back to where it's supposed to go. If it went to the state directly instead of the federal government by a state tax, then we would alleviate that problem and would not be forced into submission to federal control.
All right. We are speaking with Gary Hunt, his website, and I got to do a correction here, outpost-of-freedom.com, just so people don't get confused. He'll be with us in through the next hour. Don't go anywhere. We're listening to this Friday edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Stay with us.
HagmannReport.com. That's right, HagmannReport.com. Folks, bookmark that website, show information, news information analysis. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's the official Hagmann and the Hagmann Report YouTube channel. The official Hagmann Report YouTube channel. Please subscribe to that.
Before you continue, Hagmann Report, I want to thank John Robertson for his hard work that he's put on Hagmann Report. He's been putting up a bunch of original articles. We've also been putting other important articles up there. And I want to thank all the contributors out there who send us stories to post on our website, because it's
very
a big
much.
help. John Rappaport, Stephen Manking, many others. So
Sergeant
thank you,
Tim
John.
and
Yeah,
others.
yeah.
And Andrew Kerr as well. And our guest tonight is Gary Hunt, and of course his website outpost-freedom, outpostoffreedom.com. And he's a citizen journalist and citizen investigator, and digging to the truth of many matters. We got so much more to get into with him before we do. We talked about ProFlowers, we talked about Sherry's Berries earlier, but did you know greeninnovative.com? That's greeninnovative.com. You know them from the Super GMAG package. That is the battery charger that all you need is a little bit of water and a little bit of salt. What a great device. Well, guess what? And this is, when planning for a disaster, this is a must-have for your prepper bag or for your pantry, because you need a good supply of batteries. And the throwaway batteries, just they can go dead on the shelf or during use, and dead batteries are no good to anyone. So you need rechargeable batteries, and you need a way to recharge them. Well, Green Innovative has provided the answer. Absolutely. I just love this piece of equipment. But here's a great deal for the entire month of February, because we mentioned Sherry's Berries and ProFlowers. Ellen Riggs has decided for the entire month of February, 14% off of the entire purchase in celebration of February 14th, Valentine's Day. So this is fantastic. Go to greeninnovative.com and select your GMAG power charger. The Super GMAG package is unbelievable. The Super GMAG Complete. It gives you more batteries and more adapters at a reduced price. But again, they're offering that 14% off for Valentine's Day for the month of February. And we kind of had to twist Alan's arm to Ellen Riggs, say, come on, man. And not really. But he said, the listeners of the Hagmann Report have been so good. Let's give them an offer. And in fact, 14% off is a heck of an offer. So take advantage of this for the entire month of February, but don't wait. Go to greeninnovative.com. That's greeninnovative.com. And all you need is to use the coupon code Hagmann, Hagmann. That way you'll get your 14% off. Greeninnovative.com, coupon code Hagmann. And thank you, Ellen Riggs, for your support. And folks, thank you for supporting our sponsors.
Again, our guest from now until the end of the show is Gary Hunt. His website, outpost-freedom.com. And he's got tons of great content. All his archives are up there for the last 8-9 years. You can pick by category, by keyword. And we've been talking about the Bundy standoff, the legalities around it, and the federal government's oppressive encroachment and just disregarding of the Constitution, and how we can get back on track and what we can do to help bring light to the situation and situations like this. Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you start where you want to this hour.
Okay, well, first on the website, it goes back 24 years. It goes back to Wake.
Wow.
There's two parts to the website. I had used HTML code for until 2009. 2009, an old dog learned new tricks called blog format. So I started posting in 2009. Started posting in blog format, but on the main page, you can go back to Waco white papers and see the faxes that went out during the Waco siege.
Interesting.
There's outpost-of-freedom.com, and then at a /blog to get to the blog, or on the main page, there's a link directly to the blog. So there's 24 years of my effort in there.
Fantastic.
Let's see, January 26th, I'd been there 2 days. I was in my motel room, and I got a call saying that Lavoie, and at first they thought it was Ryan Payne. Lavoie and Ryan Payne had been shot. Lavoie's dead. And so I jumped in my truck and went down the 30 miles to the refuge to find out what was happening. And everything wasn't quite clear then, but there was chaos down at the refuge. The people were expecting an imminent attack by the federal forces, a Waco type situation. They were scrambling. At first, they agreed to stay and hold their ground. But as time went on, it dwindled down. Now, When I got down there, I realized that I left my laptop back in the motel room, so I went back up there. And by the time I got back down to the refuge, about 10 o'clock, I was on the road from the Narrows, and they'd put the front end loader across the little bridge over the canal there, the drainage or the irrigation canal. And so I spent that night and the next morning until 9 o'clock with Jason Patrick, assisting him, getting, as press came up and wanted to speak with him, I'd get them in line for him. But by then it was down to 8 people, and by the next morning it was down to 4 or 5 after Jason left, or the next day. But what we know about what happened to Lavoie, the first stop happened. Carl McConnell, who was an informant working for the government, had insisted that Ammon ride with him instead of in Lavoie's truck to keep the 2 key players, Lavoie and Ammon, apart if something happened. And McConnell, I've interviewed him, I think 5 times, even after the shooting, after he was put out as an informant by the government. Now, the government put him out intentionally. Gabriel was talking to Oregon State Police Officer Becker, and he said, well, what was your source of information? Well, we had aerial and we had an informant. And Gabriel said, I don't remember if Gabriel put the name out or if he asked him who the informant was, and it was Mark McConnell. Now, the people that were arrested that day, everybody in both vehicles was arrested, but Victoria was taken into custody, and Mark McConnell and Shauna Cox were Victoria Sharp were the only 2 that were not detained. They were taken back to Burns. The rest of the people were transported to Portland. Now, the OSP reports, different officers say, well, it was a risky traffic stop, it was a felony traffic stop, or we had an arrest warrant. But we know the warrants had not been issued until after Lavoie was killed, because his name was omitted from the defendants in that, and they would have had to have made it then after they knew that he was deceased. And we've got the same thing in the second trial with Dwayne Emer, where they said that they arrested him under the authority of a warrant, but the warrant admittedly was issued the day after they arrested him. So they get to play games with their paperwork to have that effect. But Brian Bundy is the one that has a piece of metal still in his shoulder that probably came from a shot fired by the FBI. Now, the sequence of events on shot, according to the OSP, a non-lethal projectile was fired at Lavoie's truck, which Ryan Payne was riding shotgun, the right front passenger seat. After he stuck his head out to say there's women in here, he got out of the truck. He wanted to go back and explain to them that there's women here, or he wanted to explain there were women here, and since they shot at him, he wanted to get out and put his hands up. But then they told him on the ground, walk backwards to us and all that. So he ended up out of the truck. That left Lavoie driving, and from left to right in the back seat of the truck, Ryan Bundy, Victoria Sharp, and then Shauna Cox. The first vehicle had been stopped. They got McConnell out. Then they got Ammon out and Buddha, Brian Cavalier. I think that was the order. But that McConnell had stopped right after they turned the lights on, or maybe before they turned the lights on. Lavoie had stopped a couple hundred yards up the road. Lavoie, after Ryan Payne got out, Lavoie talked to Shauna. Shauna's camera footage shows this, but we've got to get, and he kept yelling out, we're going to see the sheriff. He wanted respectable law enforcement rather than the government goons. And so they decided they were going to go the 50 miles, hopefully go the 50 miles to John Day, where the meeting was scheduled. That meeting was celebrated a few days ago as a meeting that never happened in John Day. But they drove. Then at that point, the only shot fired was the non-lethal. As they were approaching the roadblock, an OSP officer fired 3 shots at the vehicle. They all hit the vehicle. He said he did so because he was afraid that there would be risk to the OSP officers at the roadblock if he didn't fire, which is kind of stupid because if he had hit Lavoie, the truck would have plowed into the other vehicles. His argument doesn't make sense. At any rate, then, when Lavoie got down near it, he veered into the snow, and one of the officers was standing in front of him, and you can see that he turned to avoid hitting that officer. I think it was an FBI guy. The vehicle came to a stop. Lavoie got out, and right after he got out, you can hear the 2 shots and see the 1 shot enter the roof of the truck. So 3 shots had been fired at the truck already as it was driving. Then 2 shots were fired as Lavoie got out of the truck. Lavoie then, I believe, and I've spoken to Jeanette about Finicum about this, believed that Lavoie, since the shots had been fired, he wanted to get the attention away from where Victoria, especially Victoria and Shauna Cox were. So he moved away from the truck after the shots were fired. Now, the officers were looking at Lavoie. They were facing Lavoie. They hear 2 shots. Now, when gunshots are fired and you don't know where they came from, you get kind of tense. They didn't want to turn around to see where the shots came from, but their adrenaline began flowing. And they say that Lavoie reached for his weapon, but he couldn't have gotten that weapon out of that pouch. It's very possible that a non-lethal had hit him in the side because one was fired at him, admittedly. And so he may have been reaching for what was a sword, or he may have been reaching for the gun. When we get the wrongful death suit going, which I will be covering, by the way, we might be able to get some testimony to know a little more about what happened during that incident. But at any rate, they were concerned about the guy that just had the 3rd officer who had only a taser, who never fired the taser, by the way. And so they fired 3 shots into Lavoie's back, and he died probably within seconds. Shauna and Ryan both believed that he was dead, and Victoria believed that he was dead by the time they got out of the truck, which was quite a few minutes later because they kept these projectiles trying to break the windows, trying to get tear gas in the vehicle. It's not a flashbang, but it's a shell that has 8 or 9 firecracker type sounds, making it sound like a lot of gunfire. So those few minutes, probably Lavoie died.
All right. You talked about Finicum's gunshot wounds to the back. I know, obviously we knew he was shot. Wasn't sure about the locations of the shooting. Is that verified through the coroner or investigators that he was shot in the back?
The government autopsy shows 3 shots in the back. One of them came near his heart, and it was probably fatal. I don't know. I've spoken to Jeanette Finicum, but I'm waiting for the wrongful death suit. I don't know if they got an independent autopsy or not. We know that the truck has not been returned yet.
Okay.
We don't know what it is.
Gary, I'm sure. I mean, there's so much detail here. If we can, let's kind of walk this back a little bit. What's the takeaway from this? Because you've got the overreach by the feds, by the federal government. You've got the standoff. You've got a dead man, Lavoie Finicum, murdered by the FBI. You got a truck shot up. You got 2 girls that we had on our program, by the way. But at the end of the day here, what are we facing here? What are we looking at? What's the takeaway from all of this?
A government out of control.
That's okay. There it is. And not afraid to murder people like us.
They murdered 86 people in Waco.
That's right. Okay.
They burned them to death. Now, let's go back to Waco just for a second. The only people that survived the fire came out in camera view from what we call Satellite City, where the cameras could see the front and the right side of the building. Uh, Clive Doyle came out through the chapel, a hole that had been poked by the tanks in the chapel, walking through the fire. Some of the women jumped down off they came out of the windows, jumped off the first floor roof onto the ground. Another one of the guys came out and jumped down. The ones that survived came out in camera view. Nobody got out the back. It was an easy way out because from the kitchen there was a door out into this L-shaped area created by the main building and the gymnasium. And this is where Mike McNulty's research, Mike died a few years ago, but I've spoken to him many times. His research and FOIA requests have shown that there was probably gunfire, what appears to be gunfire. And what I was told by one of the people that got out that day, he went back to England. He wouldn't let me use his name, and I still respect that. But he said when people tried to go out the back door, they were being shot at. But since he was released back to England, he wasn't willing to take the risk of talking publicly, and he still won't about it because he's afraid that they might try and charge him and get him extradited back there. So I'm of the firm belief that more than likely, anybody that tried to go out any exit that was not within camera view from what would be the right front of the building, if you're facing the building back over your right shoulder, had no chance of getting out of there alive. The government wanted to kill them, as many as possible.
Same template. I mean, so you're looking at, and I didn't mean to cut you off there, but what I'm hearing from this is whether it's Waco or Ruby Ridge or Lavoy Finicum, you've got this very similar template of operational tactics and just whether it's Attorney General Janet Reno or whoever so far, the government overreach has been, and the intrusion into our lives and the illegality of things is.
Well, look at it this way. The picture I see is if you defy us, we tell you we want to arrest you, and you defy us, we're going to kill you to set an example for the next group we're going after, if we can get away with it.
Yeah. Okay. And that's okay. Very good. And I didn't mean that, but you mentioned Waco and of course which is current, the refuge, the Bundy situation, that's current as well in the news now. And, we're not hearing, by the way.
I mean, they're in jail.
I mean,
I think a guy died in jail of some medical condition that was treatable.
Joe, I just want to say this too, Gary. It amazes me to see how the conservative media, the very proponents of freedoms, non-intrusive government regulations and such, but of civil rights, the conservatives, so-called conservatives, are just all over the map on the Bundy situation, not understanding this and how the mainstream media has muddled everything up with respect to the facts of this case, along with the government. It just amazes me.
Well, look at the media right now. Trump stubbed his toe. It would become big news, and they'd figure out, what I stubbed my toe. Well, why did you say that on Twitter? There's no news on the news anymore. It's all opinions. Well, not all of it. I mean, there's some. But they're making an issue of Trump. He is the subject of the day, and he will be top of the news and be attacked for anything and everything that he does. I mean, mainstream media is as out of hand as the federal law enforcement agencies in terms of being respectful of the role of government.
It amazes me. We had, of course, we had Robert David Steele on earlier this week. We're talking about the CIA infiltration into the media, and you're talking about, for example, examples of government agents into the media, or posing as media, perhaps. So all of this is just such a dog and pony show. This is just amazing, and I know we want to expand too. We've got just a little bit left of this segment and the entire segment left. We want to expand into your writings about, in your research and such about the immigration, illegal immigration, and a lot of things that you cover.
Illegal immigration, what's been going on in the news with the Trump executive orders and the judicial judges blocking that, as well as the indoctrination of Islam into our school children. Yep. If that's somewhere you want to go into.
Yeah, I mean, you've got so much.
Well, I haven't spent a lot of time on that. I'm looking more at when the government's turned against constitutionalist patriots, people that believe that the government should be what the founding fathers gave us. But I have, over time, looked at the immigration issue, and Teddy Roosevelt I don't recall the name of the book now. I've got it somewhere back there, but I did post in one of the blogs the requirement that people that come here should assimilate. They should learn English, and if they don't, send them back to where they came from. And then until 1986, I'm not sure when it began, but it goes back to the 30s. At least we had quotas for people from countries. They had to have money when they got here. They had to have skills or education. They had to be limited quotas from the various countries to keep them mixed, not a flood of one type of people. And somehow we lost that with the amnesty in 1986. And we're seeing the repercussions of that now. I was quite pleased that they've started the process. I feel sorry for the lady. That's too bad. Go back to the country you came from, but you broke the law here. You're a felon. And that's exactly what he said. We're going to get the criminals out of here. So they deported her. They've got thousands of felons. They're going to be busy for a while, and it appears that the process has started. But, there's another one that we seem to be blind. We're looking at the United States. We only have, 8, 10, 12 terrorist events in this country, Muslim-related terrorist events in this country. We don't look to what's happening in Germany. We don't look what's happened almost destroying Sweden. We don't look what's happening in London or any part of England. We don't look at what happens in France, where they occupy many blocks just, doing their prayers.
Yep.
And we act like, they're not going to do that to us. And so we've got this influx. And I agree with Trump. And I think that he had a very good approach to this, and like he said, he or somebody said today, they didn't even cite the statute that gives him the authority to do what he did. Now, the only thing that I had a problem with when I first read that was there are people, what they refer to as LPRs, legal permanent residents,
right,
that they should be treated differently. And unless they've done something bad, they have every right to return. That makes sense. If they're employed on a sabbatical, if they have family in Canada, like the guy that works for Facebook and wants to go visit his mother and come back, that, unless they've demonstrated to the contrary, they should be allowed in. I wrote an article about it as part of the plan for restoration of constitutional government that looks at it that way. If they were Muslims and they got here, and I forgot what year it was, 1990, I think, before then, unless they've done something bad, they have to go back. But if they came after the first World Trade Center, the fizzled bombing in the parking lot, if they came after that, they would have to prove that they have done good in this country to remain. Otherwise, they would have to go back. But, if we look at the numbers, these people get more than our own people, that are veterans, that are unemployed welfare people. They get more. They're handed a cash bonus when they arrive. They get food stamps. They get all this gratuitous garbage that they have never participated in accumulating the treasury for that element. And so they're sucking us dry.
And you, as a Vietnam veteran, I just can't imagine how you would feel, having served our country in Vietnam, looking at this disparity of treatment. And you're right, by the way, and thank you, by the way, for your service to our country. And I know it sounds trite, anytime someone says that, but I do mean that. But
better late than never, and thank you.
Well, I just missed Vietnam well, anyway, um, the um, the woman you had mentioned, the woman that sparked the protests here in southern Los Angeles. It's interesting to me that the blowback, Gary, from this are the groups. The blowback here are from the groups that have been around for a while. They're connected to, well, people like Ramsey Clark, and this goes back to, the protests of the Vietnam War, the very war you served in. So there's a lot of 60-ish and early 70-ish people, framework participants that are active today, and I think this is the dry. I opened the program. We opened the program today, but this is the dry tinder for the Civil War that's coming. So we're approaching a break, and I'm so glad that Gary, that you're able to stay with us here for the final segment. But Gary Hunt is our guest. Outpostoffreedom.com. You have to put hyphens between the outpost and freedom. Outpostoffreedom.com. Gary Hunt.
Yeah, and he will be with us until the end of the program, and we are going to get into a number of things. Bookmark his website. He's got so many documents, so much evidence.
24 years, right? 24 years of stuff?
Yeah, he said 24 years. I only went by the right-hand side where it lists the archives. It only goes down to November 2009, so I stopped there.
Some of it's in Aramaic, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely a very content-heavy site dealing with numerous topics. We'll be right back for our third and final segment with Gary Hunt after this thing.
Visit HagmannReport.com for the news and articles that matter most. Stay tuned. We will be right back.
Certain times it makes sense to have a sustainable backup method to cook food and boil water. If your current plan includes using a fuel burning stove or cooking over an open fire, then there's a much better way. The Minuteman Rocket Stove is a biomass burning cooking stove that only requires small quantities of sticks and twigs for fuel. The Minuteman Stove is easy to use, smokeless, portable, powerful, and sustainable. For the finest in survival cooking stoves and fire starters made right here in the USA, go to MinutemanStove.com. That's MinutemanStove.com.
You may never look at your city, town, or its people the same way ever again. Stained by Blood, a murder investigation based upon a true story by private investigator Douglas J. Hagmann. Using the character Mark Stiles, Hagmann takes you on a journey behind the scenes where the homicide becomes secondary to an underworld of satanic ritual abuse, child abduction, and even mind-controlled experimentation. A world dismissed as conspiracy by those who want to keep its secrets hidden, exposing the dangers, denials, and deceptions. For 5 years, a brutal killer remained on the loose, free to kill again. As Mark struggles to navigate the maze of bizarre twists and untangle a web of deeply hidden secrets kept by some of the most powerful and influential people in his community and beyond. Stained by Blood. Order your copy of this engaging novel today at HagmannandHagmann.com and defending the truth from what the mainstream media won't tell you. You're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, streaming live on the Global Star Radio Network.
You want to go with that or not?
Yes, Gary, yes. Stand by. HagmannReport.com. That's where to go for news, information, analysis. I want to thank all of our contributors, John Rappaport, Andrew Kerr, so many others, Sergeant Tim, everybody. Thank you so much for your and folks, read what they have written.
Andrew Kerr has a new article up. You will want to read that.
Absolutely. Well, and look, there is so much, the investigations. Watch as we unravel what is known as Pizzagate. It's Pedogate. It's large. It's involved. Watch in the coming weeks. Watch the little puffs of smoke coming from different parts of the country.
There's been some interesting data releases, some very important connections being made.
Yes.
It's all it needs to be put together properly, packaged in order for information sharing. But just this last week, there's been several major developments.
Before we get back to our guest, Gary Hunt, his website, outpostoffreedom.com, hyphenate that, outpostoffreedom.com. Before we get back to him, T.C. Joseph's This Generation series of novels. If you haven't gotten the series, what a fantastic series it is. It's a thrilling series of novels where T.C. Joseph, an incredible writer, he takes us into the lives of three families in the world where conspiracy theories and Bible prophecies collide. You know, this series is actually pretty good. If you've got someone that you know, for example, and they're not really into, or I don't know what the correct word would be or correct phrase would be. If they're not really aware of things, to make them aware, to give them a subtle nudge, to take a look at what's happening around them, to awaken them. And they could be a member of your family. Give them this series of books. Rave reviews from Kirkus as well as Blue Ink. Get your copies, folks, of T.C. Joseph's This Generation series on Amazon.com today. Book 1 is Precipice, Book 2 is Pentecost, Book 3 is Penance. All three books, I've read them, and they're just fabulous. Also, thisgenerationseries.com. That's thisgenerationseries.com for more information. Or, as I said, Amazon.com, Book 1, Precipice, Book 2, Pentecost, and 3 is Penance. T.C. Joseph's This Generation series, thisgenerationseries.com. Go ahead, Joe, with Gary. Gary on.
Gary's with us, and this is our last segment. We've covered a lot of information. Outpostoffreedom.com hyphen after outpost and of. So outpostoffreedom.com. We've been talking about what has happened from the Bundy Ranch, the people who were involved.
Let's pull this back to the Portland trial.
Yeah.
Let's pull this back because Joe, during the break, he had said, Gary had said a few things that I think are pretty amazing.
Yes, they are. Gary, if you just want to start by laying out what happened, what's going on with Portland, and we'll jump in and go from there.
Well, let me just one thing about immigration. One more thing about immigration. So, a fellow named John Ritzheimer, you might recognize the name. I've been in touch with John. We've never met in person, but when he was doing this stuff down in Phoenix, I got to know him, and we've become friends that have never met since then. Now, he was one of the participants. He shifted gears from immigration to land rights, and I think it's a good move, but he was one of the advocates that ended up on the apparently on the kill this guy list that a number of other people in this country have because they're opposed to immigration. So on immigration, there are people identified in this country who are outspoken that are on target lists of ISIS and other, ISIS or other Muslim groups. And I just want to make that point that people in this country are being threatened because of their opposition to Muslim immigration in this country.
Isn't that interesting? And we have information very similar to that, just to let you know. There are a lot of targets out there in this. Go ahead.
Well, I've been a defender of John, so I may be on the list too. But if you get a copy, send it to me. I'd like to find out if I need to duck. The Portland trial, I didn't go to Portland for the trial, but I was reporting quite a bit during the progression of the paper chase. Now, the paper chase was months long preceding the trial itself. The trial began in September, was over in October. But from January or February on, this paper chase goes on, motions in limine and things like that, trying to what witnesses can we call, what can we not do, things like that. And, I think that we were all pleasantly surprised when the government, as near as I can tell, they've spent over $100 million on the prosecution of these people. When the verdict came back not guilty on all counts except one, and it was undecided. It was the Ryan Bundy stealing cameras that were offered back to the government. They just chose not to pick them up. That everybody was completely surprised. Now, during the course of the trial, though, the government, under the guise of we've got to protect the informants, because if their names are let out, if they're exposed, they're put at great risk. Now, the first informant put out, what I mentioned earlier, was Carl McConnell. He was put out by the government prosecutor, Mr. Gabriel, and OSP Officer Becker. The second one that we have that's been identified is a lady named Terry Linnell, and she contacted me and she said, "I'm going to be testifying, and I want to tell you my story." So I put her story up on the blog under the Burns Chronicles, and she testified. But the agreement was I wouldn't put the article out until she testified. She called me, I'd put it out. Her testimony, the government tried to get her to lie about what some of the plans were, and she said, "I didn't say that," over and over. And finally, they gave up. They acted like they were reading off their reports. The third informant that was put out was a guy named Fabio Menaggio, who went to Burns as John Kilman. He was found out by the diligence of the investigators for the defense attorneys and Jeff Banta primarily, who brought him up and said, "Who is this guy?" Now, it's interesting that the defense was not allowed to call additional witnesses because that would be repetitive, but the government had showed a 1-minute video of a bunch of guys shooting across a canal, 20 or 30 guys shooting across a canal, and they showed it 4 times, but that wasn't repetitive. But then when Kilman came on, he was the one that was doing this training and had these guys shooting, and he's a government informant. So this was one of the factors that was mentioned by juror number 4 that made them begin to question the government. So we've got 3 informants put out by the government. Well, I managed to get a hold of the discovery. I'm not supposed to have it. They said not to be disseminated by court order, but and the first one that I used, I said I'm not disseminating, I'm excerpting from, and I'm not subject to the court order. The court protective order talked to the attorneys, the investigators, the defendants themselves. But I began publishing these, and after I brought out 2 guys that apparently have been involved with the FBI as informants, one in Washington, a guy named Coleman that's all over Washington, rubbing shoulders with all the patriots, probably reporting almost daily. And you can make $200,000 or $300,000 a year as an informant, it appears.
Oh, yeah.
This other one got Rob Seaver, who was following what group called the National Liberty Alliance in Oregon, and it was all over Oregon and meeting people. In fact, he was second in command of NLA in Oregon, and the person that was first in command of NLA in Oregon was finally convinced when I provided her some of the information that the second in command, Rob Seaver, was an informant. There was no other way that this information could have come out. Now, this is, basically interviewing people and deductive reasoning that I came up with these. So at this point, I put 11 out. Well, after I put Seaver and Coleman out, the government decided they didn't like what I was doing. I'd put out more before then, but all of a sudden they came up with this cease and desist letter that was hand delivered to me by the FBI, Matthew Catalano out of Chico, California. We met at a restaurant. I asked him, do you have an arrest warrant? He said, no. I said, okay, I'll meet you. And we met, and he gave me the letter, and I said, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not subject to the protective order. I'm not one of the people identified in that. And I don't think they have any jurisdiction down here. So he reported back, and then
wait a second. So you were wait a second. You were reporting on the matters of the trial. You had the information from discovery. You were publishing that. The FBI says no. Hands you a cease and desist letter, but it's not applicable to you, as you stated, because you're not a party to either one. You're just reporting on this, is right. What you're saying, right?
Yes. And I'm also not in the Portland division. Their jurisdiction is Portland district. Their jurisdiction. I'm in California, and they didn't want to buy it at first. But just briefly, these are the occurrences since then. The last one John put up on the page this afternoon is tilting at windmills redux. It's
Right.
freedom of the press 6. But the government came first. The government gave me the cease and desist. And then I just went on Facebook. I had told some friends that the FBI had visited me, and rumor was running around Facebook. And I used Facebook like the fax network. It's a push-out tool. I put it out, people share it, and it goes out. It's not come to my page and read it. Here, let's push it out, which I learned from the 90s. So I put out a statement about the visit on January 6th. On January 6th, the government filed a motion to enforce with an affidavit and a proposed order. So I put out Freedom of the Press number 1, meeting with the FBI, explaining the meeting. On the 7th, on the 8th, I put out Freedom of the Press number 2, which described what they were asking for in the cease and desist. On January 9th, the judge put out a minute order saying that I had to appear there. I don't remember the exact wording, but then, but she also told the government they had to put she put their feet to the fire, that they had to prove the things that I brought up, jurisdiction and the long arm of the order did not reach me. So I wrote a grateful thank you, thinking that she was putting their feet to the fire, but what she was looking for at that time was them to give her the arguments to go ahead and issue an order against me. So the government then filed a supplemental memorandum and affidavit to try and they did not address jurisdiction, and they asked her to file a supplement to the protective order from March 2016, and she did that with an order granting in part, and she gave a new supplement. Now, this new supplement says anybody that receives the stuff I wrote that has this forbidden material in it and shares that is now comes within this order. She's encompassed, kind of like Robarts did up in Washington, encompassed the entire country. In this protective order was to the attorneys, their investigators, and the defendants only. She just broadened it to include what amounts to thousands of people, tens of thousands of people now.
This is judicial activism at its finest, I suppose.
I would say so, but I persist in jurisdiction, and so in that order, she kind of said, "There's a problem. We're going to have to find a court of competent jurisdiction." So she addressed the long arm of the order, but she threw back to the government the fact that we've got a problem with jurisdiction. We have to find a court of competent jurisdiction. So then now the government in their previous motion had called my postings contemptuous. So Freedom of the Press number 3 is contemptuous postings. Now, let me stop right here and say they're fighting in the court with court rules. They're bending the heck out of the rules, but they're fighting in court, and there's a degree of decorum there. I'm not. I'm fighting in the press of the court of public opinion, and I'm using street rules. And so they're mentioning my paperwork in their motions, in their affidavits and things. So they're entering my stuff in the court record for me, and I don't have to submit to jurisdiction to do it. From a legal standpoint, that's pretty significant because it becomes a part of the record should this proceed. They have given my evidence credence in the courtroom. I don't think they really thought about it before they did it. But what I'm finding with what they do is they'll throw in citations, a court case here, the case law stuff, building things up. I don't think they read them because I go pull the cases and I read them and, well, that's not what it says. This is what it says. And so I'm actually, in a sense, fighting a legal battle with street rules by arguing against the citations they have, and in some cases coming up with my own legal citations to show that I have every right to do this.
But I mean, just to be clear, this is lawfare too. I mean,
but it's not in the courtroom. The beauty of it is it's an exception. I mean, I've talked with friends about lawfare for a long time, and lawfare was applied during the course of the trial. But now it's broken out of the courtroom, and we're fighting lawfare between the court and the court of public opinion.
Right.
At any rate, then I wrote the order explaining the order and the exemptions she made, the court of competent jurisdiction. Then the government filed a motion to show cause. They want me to go up there with an affidavit. They want me to go up there and show cause why I shouldn't be subject to the contempt of court charge they want to have imposed on me. And interestingly, in that affidavit, not only did they reference my articles by title, they attached one to it, and it's kind of a cute one because it's got a picture of Judge Anna Brown with a gold crown on her head. And so I don't know how she felt when she saw that, but I did point out too that the defense attorneys, I know, are getting a kick out of my articles, and they enjoy getting them and laughing about them. And the government waits apprehensively, but they cringe when they get the articles. But they are reading them every day because they're responding to what I'm putting out in the court of public opinion. So we've changed the playing field from the courtroom to the public in this. And the public is enjoying it. Then when they came up with the government motion to show cause in the affidavit, I wrote tilting windmills. That's where I really noticed that they were citing these cases that were not on point to what we were doing. Now I've got a little, over the years, and reading cases and everything, get an idea how they say, and reading the cases in the case law in their filings for this last year. So I wrote tilting at windmills because what they're doing is they're citing cases that are not applicable. So it reminded me of Don Quixote and Pancho Sancho. Sancho Pancha, whatever the guy, his sidekick was,
right?
Tilting windmills, Cervantes' work. So then they filed a government supplement memorandum to them trying to get the show cause order, and in their, I think it was 12 pages, they've got 60 citations, and I wasn't going to pull 60 citations, so I pulled 5 of the citations and showed where what they were claiming on them was wrong as far as jurisdiction. For example, they used one, the Western District of Missouri, Western Division, had a case, but then it shows that somebody was under the jurisdiction of the court that was in the Southwestern District of the Western District of Missouri. So they didn't see the distinction that it was all within the same district, but in separate divisions, trying to use that. That's just an example of they were off base. And so they actually supported my challenge to jurisdiction because I'm not in that district. The divisions are just pieces within the district.
Right.
For example, Burns is in Pendleton District, Eugene District, the Portland District. Division, Pendleton Division, Eugene Division. There are 5 divisions, I think, in Oregon. That they're all part of the.
Well, the bottom line is they're contextually inaccurate. Based on, the citations are not are not applicable, and it's amazing because they're government lawyers who are annotating this with improper or non-contextual citations, and you point that out. And that you do that just to be clear, you do that publicly, and that of course goes into the court record, which is just amazing.
Well, they might stop putting in the court record now that I've addressed it, because I thank them for putting in the record in one of my articles. But the last article that John put up today is kind of interesting because, am I a blogger or am I a journalist? I've considered myself a journalist. My articles are packed with facts. I don't make things up. Sometimes I speculate on things, but it's based on a solid foundation of facts.
It's reason supposition. It's reason supposition. Okay, all right. And I'm not so sure that there's a distinction with a difference between a blogger, we'll say, with the facts, who's investigated.
Well,
yeah, go on.
There's not. When AP ran the article right after this started up, they called me a blogger, and I talked to Maxine Bernstein, and she did point out that I was a journalist in one of her articles. But this last government supplemental motion, when you get down to about page 9, somewhere down there, they call me a blogger. So from that point on, instead of United States attorney, he's the United States shyster. So I call the defense attorneys attorneys, but I call the government attorneys shysters from this point on, and I will until they recognize me as a journalist. That's street rules.
Interesting.
So they're going to see shyster every time I address them. It will no longer will I call them United States attorney. It'll be United States shyster or assistant United States shyster.
Okay, so I mean, because we only have a few minutes left. So in the big arena here, where do you see this going at the end of the day?
Well, John Ritzheimer's attorney suggested to him after they filed this last memorandum that they're going to arrest Gary. The FBI is going to arrest Gary. And after I wrote this last one, that Tilting at Windmills Redux, number 6, I said, John, get that to your attorney and give her a chance to read it and then find out what she says. And she wrote back to him and he passed it on to me. Well, he's made some very good points. So I guess they think I'm not going to get arrested. And right now I'm kind of enjoying the fight.
But
what can I say?
Under what charges, though, Gary? What charges would they have to even consider arrest for you?
Well, they want to get me charged with contempt of court, and contempt of court doesn't warrant a jury. It's the discretion of the judge. But I have to be within her jurisdiction, and the order, my violation has to be I have to be subject to the whatever it is I'm in violation of. Normally, it's somebody that's in court or somebody that's helped somebody hide assets or something like that. In fact, one of the key words they finally addressed was aid and abet. I haven't been aiding and abetting anybody. They don't know where these documents came from.
Wow.
You know, it could have come from one of their own people. Wow. So, you know, they've got, I think they've got no argument, but, you know, I've still got some aces up my sleeve. I just respond to what they say. And, you know, we can probably go a few more rounds, but I think eventually right now she can either issue an order, which I'll ignore, and I don't think she will. She can deny their motion for the show cause, or she can just let it lie and do nothing more about it.
Huh.
So those are the three possibilities. And I don't think they're going to proceed to try and arrest me.
It certainly wouldn't appear that way. With respect to well, go on. Go ahead.
It's public. It makes it difficult at this point for them to overcome what I've thrown back at them. Right. You know, if this was being done behind closed doors, I'd probably be in jail right now.
Of the people involved in this, the government informants, can you tick them off, name them off, that you can fully identify?
That I can fully identify, yes. Just 1 second. Let me find my list here.
I mean, we're all say alleged and with reasonable certainty. So,
yes, and you know, by the reaction of all of them, it's a done deal. Terry Linnell was the first one. Alan Varner, who was involved with Camp Lone Star in Texas, and I knew him, and you know, it explains what our relationship was. I really liked the guy because when some people caught me in the parking lot in Burns and tried to get 20 and 30-year-old guys, 5 of them tried to get a 69-year-old man in a fight, he kind of stood up for me. Then Fabio Menaggio, John Kilman, and then Mark McConnell, the government had outed. This is the sequence that I've written articles about them.
Right.
Though. And Will Coleman in Washington that I mentioned, Marshall Spring and Marshall Ben. Marshall is his first name, Spring's first name, but Marshall Ben was not really a marshal, but he was part of Bruce Doucette's group, who was a buddy of Spring. These are the people who were inside. 9 were inside, 6 were outside in the total number of informants. So those were the 2, 4, 6, 7 inside. Now I have one more that was inside, but on agreement with one of the defendants, I've agreed not to go public with his name, but it's been provided to the defense attorneys through the defendants. Outside, we have Dennis Dickinson. He was a member back in October of OMD. Ryan Payne brought him in, and he started reporting the day he became a member of the OMD 5-member advisory board. Robert Seaver that I mentioned within LA was never inside, but he was reporting from outside. Tom Diamond was a second tier in OMD. These are people who would help with the board get word out or had different duties in there. And then Melvin Lee, I'm not sure of. but he sure seems tied. But I only have one report that might be Melvin Lee's. So I didn't write an article about him, but that information has been passed on to the government. Now, that's the only one that I'm not sure of. I can't prove, let me put it that way. And so with the one that I can't name at this point, there's only 3 out of the 15 that I haven't identified.
Gotcha. All right. We've only got about a minute left, my brother. Very interesting indeed. Very, very detailed
Time went
stuff.
fast.
Wow. Okay. 30 seconds to your closing statement there, sir.
One way or another, we'll get our country back with the grace of God. Maybe.
Said, yeah. Thank you for your diligent work and for coming on and explaining this. Wow, a lot of information. You've done yeoman's work with respect to this. Wow, just what a mess. But thank you for putting some clarity to that situation. Gary Hunt, outpostoffreedom.com. You take care of yourself, man. We're gonna be thinking about you.
I do appreciate the opportunity, and if you ever want me back, feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
like there's a lot to cover, and I've been doing this for a long time.
We're going to keep in touch. Trust us. You're an asset to the freedom movement, to the truth movement, to the people out there. And as far as I'm concerned, you are a journalist.
Outpostoffreedom.com. Bookmark the site. Check out all the interesting and informative content that is there, and I'm sure we will have Mr. Hunt back in the future.
Absolutely. A wonderful man and a knowledgeable guy, to be sure, one of rich experience, and of course a military veteran, served in Vietnam. A tremendous amount of information. Folks, that'll do it for us today. Again, don't forget, we're going to be in North Chicago, Gurnee, Illinois,